God told me to warn you. You are being moved, not politely, not slowly, not with your permission, but forcibly. You did not ask for this shift. You did not schedule it, and you did not prepare for how sudden it would be. Yet God has decided that where you are is no longer allowed to contain who you are becoming. This is why everything feels urgent, why the ground beneath you feels unstable, why familiar doors are closing without explanation. You think something is going wrong, but God says something irreversible is happening. This is the last January you will recognize, because once this month finishes its assignment, you will not fit back into the old version of your life. You've been wondering why resistance has increased, why misunderstandings have multiplied, why people who once applauded you now look confused or distant. God says they will not see you, not because you are invisible, but because the level you are being moved into is beyond the perception of those who are committed to comfort. When God accelerates a person, He does not ask the crowd for permission. He pulls you forward while others are still debating whether you deserve it. That is why you feel dragged instead of guided. Forced movement is still divine movement. Sudden displacement is still God's precision. You are not losing balance, you are losing delay. Some of you have been praying for clarity, but God is answering with motion. You asked for confirmation, and He answered with disruption. You wanted reassurance, and He responded with separation. This is because the season you are entering does not require your understanding, it requires your obedience. God says if He explained everything before moving you, you would try to negotiate the process. You would ask to keep certain people, certain habits, certain fears, certain timelines, but this move is not negotiable. It is enforced mercy. It is urgent alignment. It is God protecting the future version of you from the current version of your attachments. Do not be shocked by how fast things are happening. Do not panic because you cannot explain it to others. God never announces promotion to those who benefited from keeping you small. They will not see you because they are not assigned to your next level. They were comfortable with your old capacity, your old availability, your old limitations. But God says that version of you has expired. This is why conversations feel shallow, why old environments feel suffocating, why your spirit grows restless even when nothing looks wrong on the surface. You are being pulled by a future that refuses to wait. This last January carries a divine urgency. God says it is the closing chapter of a season that overstayed its welcome. You survived things you should not have survived. You endured delays that tried to rewrite your identity. You remained faithful when it would have been easier to become bitter, silent, or smaller. And now God says enough. The movement has begun. And once it begins, it does not slow down to accommodate fear. That is why you feel like you are running without warming up. That is why you feel exposed, stretched, and challenged all at once. God is not testing you. He is relocating you. Some of you are trying to explain your shift to people who only understand consistency, not calling. They want you to remain predictable so they can feel safe. But God never builds destiny on predictability. He builds it on obedience. When God decides to move you, He does not consult your comfort zone. He removes it. This is why familiar routines are breaking, why old plans no longer excite you, why your spirit rejects what your mind once accepted. God says you cannot carry old expectations into a new assignment. That is why He is forcing movement, so nothing old survives the transition. You must understand this clearly. Forced movement does not mean rejection. It means readiness. God does not forcibly move those who are unqualified. He forcibly moves those who linger too long in places they have outgrown. You stayed faithful in obscurity. You stayed disciplined when nobody noticed. You stayed obedient when there was no applause. And now God says the delay has served its purpose. The waiting has completed its work. The silence has refined you enough. What you are experiencing now is the release. They will not see you because they are still looking for the version of you that God has already retired. They are still speaking to the you that doubted, the you that hesitated, the you that asked for permission. But God says you are moving with authority now. You are moving with clarity now. You are moving with momentum now. And those who are addicted to familiarity cannot process transformation. Let misunderstand. Let them question. Let them remain confused. Their inability to see you is not your responsibility. This last January is not about nostalgia. It is about severance. God is cutting cords you were too emotional to cut yourself. He is ending conversations you kept reviving. He is closing doors you kept reopening. Not because He is cruel, but because He is committed. Committed to your future. Committed to your assignment, committed to the version of you that walks with confidence instead of apology. Forced movement is God saying, you have lingered long enough in preparation and now you must step into execution. Some of you are afraid because you feel unprepared, but God says preparation is not what qualifies you. Obedience does. You were never meant to feel ready, you were meant to feel led. Readiness depends on information, but obedience depends on trust. God says, if you wait until you feel fully ready, you will miss the window He has opened. This is why the move feels sudden. It has an expiration date. Heaven has a schedule, and your obedience must align with it. Notice how distractions are falling away. Notice how certain temptations no longer interest you. Notice how you are losing patience for what once entertained you. This is not boredom, this is elevation. God is refining your appetite because where you are going requires focus. He is sharpening your discernment because where you are going demands precision. He is increasing your sensitivity because where you are going requires alignment. You cannot carry excess into acceleration. They will not see you because visibility changes when altitude changes. At a certain height, details disappear. Void is fate. Opinions lose volume. God says, stop trying to be understood by people who are committed to staying grounded while you are being lifted. The higher you go, the fewer explanations you owe. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. Movement does not require announcement, it requires alignment. This last January is exposing who was only assigned to your past. Some relationships were seasonal, not eternal. Some connections were instructional, not permanent. God says, stop mourning what He has already released. What you call loss, He calls clearance. What you call separation, He calls protection. What you call loneliness, He calls focus. Forced movement is God rearranging your environment to match your calling. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not missing anything. God says everything is converging. What felt delayed was being synchronized. What felt unfair was being positioned. What felt like denial was actually preparation in disguise. And now the shift is happening all at once. That is why it feels overwhelming. Acceleration always feels chaotic before it feels rewarding. Do not look back hoping for recognition. Do not slow down waiting for validation. Do not hesitate because someone else is uncomfortable with your growth. God says your obedience will offend those who benefited from your hesitation. But this is not the season to explain. This is the season to move. The force you feel is not pressure from life. It is propulsion from heaven. This last January marks the end of self-doubt, the end of second-guessing, the end of shrinking to fit spaces God never designed for you. You are stepping into rooms where your presence will be questioned, but your I am pact will be undeniable. God says they may not see you at first, but they will feel the shift when you arrive. Movement changes atmosphere before it changes perception. Some of you are grieving what you thought would come with you. God says, not everything can cross this threshold. Certain mindsets, habits, and attachments cannot survive where you are going. That is why the move is forceful. If God moved gently, you would try to bring everything with you. But this level requires lightness. It requires freedom. It requires trust. You must stop interpreting resistance as failure. Resistance is confirmation. If there were no opposition, there would be no significance. God says the friction you feel is proof that you are moving against limitation. Smooth paths do not always lead to meaningful destinations. Sometimes the roughness is necessary to shake off what does not belong. This is not about speed, it is about alignment. God is not rushing you, He is positioning you. When alignment happens, movement feels sudden. But heaven has been planning this longer than you realize. Every delay, every disappointment, every closed door was part of the calibration. And now the system is ready. The shift is unavoidable. They will not see you because they are still measuring life by comfort instead of calling. They are still choosing safety over obedience. But God says, you were never designed to blend in. You were designed to move ahead. And this last January is the launch point. Once you cross it, there is no returning to who you were. Stop asking why it has to be this way. Start trusting who is leading you. God has never lost control of your story. He has never been confused about why. Our direction. What feels abrupt to you is timely to Him. What feels forced to you is necessary to protect you from stagnation. You are not being punished, you are being promoted. You are not being scattered, you are being sent. You are not being isolated, you are being refined. God says, let go, even if your hands are shaking. Move forward, even if your voice trembles. Obedience does not require confidence, it creates it. This last January is a doorway, not a destination. Once you pass through it, your pace will change, your priorities will shift, your tolerance for distraction will disappear. God says, do not romanticize the past. It has nothing left to offer you. Your future is calling louder than your memories. They will not see you because God is hiding you in plain movement. While others are watching your departure, heaven is preparing your arrival. While others are questioning your decision, God is confirming your direction. While others are doubting your capacity, God is expanding it. The force you feel is not loss of control, it is surrender. And surrender to God is never dangerous, it is powerful. This is the moment where obedience overrides fear, where faith outruns logic, where movement silences doubt. You are not falling apart, you are breaking through. This is the warning and the promise. Do not resist the move. Do not cling to what is ending. Do not slow down out of fear. God has decided that this is the last January of delay, the last January of hesitation, the last January of shrinking. Once this month completes its assignment, your life will speak a different language, move at a different speed, and carry a different authority. Now listen deeper, Becca. Use God is not only moving you geographically or externally, He is shifting your inner government. The way you think, the way you decide, the way you tolerate things is being reprogrammed. This is why you can no longer pretend, no longer settle, no longer ignore what once felt easy to overlook. God is tightening your spirit. He is sharpening your discernment. He is removing your ability to be comfortable in places that do not honor the weight of what He placed inside you. You are not becoming difficult, you are becoming aligned. God says the reason this movement feels forceful is because the season you are leaving tried to keep you through emotional attachment. You grew roots where God only intended assignments. You invested your heart where God only gave you a task. And now He is uprooting you, not to harm you, but to save you from staying too long in soil that can no longer nourish your destiny. Prolonged comfort would have cost you your calling, so God interrupted it. There are people who are shocked by your change, but God says they should have been shocked by how long you stayed. You endured misunderstanding, stagnation, and silence with grace, but grace does not mean permanence. God never asked you to die in places meant to train you. He trained you so you could move. He shaped you so you could expand. He disciplined you so you could lead. And now the time of quiet formation is giving way to visible transition. This movement is dismantling your dependence on human approval. God is teaching you how to move without applause, how to obey without reassurance, how to stand without agreement. You are learning to hear God louder than the crowd. This is why familiar voices are fading. This is why advice that once comforted you now confuses you. God is reducing the noise so His instruction becomes unmistakable. Where you are going, confusion would be costly. Some of you are experiencing emotional exhaustion not because you are weak, but because you are shedding layers. Old expectations are falling off. Old identities are dissolving. Old limitations are losing authority. God says shedding can feel like loss until you realize how heavy what you were carrying had become. Freedom often feels unfamiliar before it feels joyful. God is also confronting your sense of control. You wanted the timing to be clean, the transition to be graceful, the outcome to be predictable. But God says predictability would have delayed obedience. If you knew every step, you would try to manage the process instead of trusting the guide. So He removed the map and increased the movement. Faith grows fastest when certainty is removed. This is not the season to over-explain yourself. God says explanations drain energy meant for execution. Silence will protect you. Obedience will justify you. Results will speak for you. Not everyone needs to understand what God told you to do. Understanding is not a requirement for alignment. Agreement is not a prerequisite for obedience. You are also learning that not everyone who walked with you can walk into what is next. God says some people were witnesses, not companions. They were meant to observe your process, not participate in your promise. Do not confuse longevity with assignment. Length of presence does not equal depth of purpose. God assigns people by season, not sentiment. This forced movement is breaking the illusion that stability equals safety. God says stagnation is more dangerous than change. Staying where He has finished speaking is more risky than stepping where He has only begun. Safety is not found in familiarity, it is found in obedience. And obedience will sometimes require you to move while your knees are shaking and your answers are incomplete. God is also increasing your authority by removing your dependence on emotional validation. You no longer need constant reassurance to move forward. You no longer need permission to obey. You no longer need consensus to act. God says leadership begins when obedience becomes more important than comfort. And you are crossing that threshold now. This last January is exposing false security. Things you trusted are proving unreliable. Systems you leaned on are shifting. Plans you built are being rewritten. Not because God failed, but because He refuses to let you anchor your future to anything temporary. He is becoming your only reference point. When everything else moves, His voice remains steady. Some of you are worried about what you are leaving behind, but God says you should be more focused on what is being unlocked ahead of you. You are not losing ground, you are gaining range. You are not abandoning purpose, you are expanding it. What felt like confinement was protecting you until your capacity matured. Now your capacity has grown, and confinement has become restriction. God is also healing your relationship with uncertainty. You used to fear not knowing. Now you are learning to move even when clarity unfolds gradually. Faith is not the absence of questions. It is the refusal to let questions paralyze obedience. God says trust is built in motion, not in stillness. You may feel like you are ahead of people you once walked beside, but God says comparison will only distract you. Every assignment has its own pace. Every calling has its own weight. Your movement is not an accusation against those who are stationary. It is simply evidence of a different instruction. Stay humble, stay focused, stay obedient. This season requires emotional discipline. You cannot afford to be pulled back by guilt, nostalgia, or fear of being misunderstood. God says anyone who truly belongs in your future will adjust to your obedience, not demand your stagnation. You are not responsible for managing other people's discomfort with your growth. God is also teaching you how to carry silence with confidence. There will be moments when you are moving and nobody claps. Moments when obedience feels lonely. Moments when progress feels unseen. But God says hidden movement still counts. Seeds grow in darkness before they break the surface. Do not despise invisible progress. You are entering a phase where your decisions carry more weight. Casual choices will no longer be tolerated by your spirit. Small compromises will feel heavier. This is not pressure, it is stewardship. God increases responsibility before He increases visibility. What you are practicing now is preparation for influence. This movement is also refining your prayer. You are no longer asking for escape. You are asking for alignment. You are no longer begging for relief. You are seeking direction. You are no longer praying small prayers. You are surrendering outcomes. God says maturity sounds quieter but moves faster. Do not confuse emotional discomfort with the divine absence. God is closer now than He was in your comfortable seasons. Silence does not mean distance. Sometimes God is quiet because He is watching you apply what He already said. Obedience after instruction is the highest form of faith. This last January is teaching you how to walk without leaning. You are learning to stand without props. You are discovering strength you did not know you had. God says this strength was always there, but comfort kept it dormant. Pressure reveals what peace concealed. You are not being rushed, you are being released. You are not being chased, you are being sent. You are not being displaced, you are being positioned. God's hand is steady even when the movement feels abrupt. Trust the force. It is not chaos, it is precision. Let the confusion fall away. Let the fear burn off. Let the attachments loosen. God is doing something irreversible. And once you settle into this new movement, you will realize that what felt forced was actually mercy. What felt sudden was actually timing. And what felt lonely was actually protection. Hear this carefully, because God is also addressing your fear of visibility. You have prayed to be hidden when pressure increased, but now God says hiding is no longer protection. It would be delay. There was a season when concealment preserved you, when silence kept you safe, when obscurity allowed growth without interference. But God says that season has fulfilled its assignment. The movement you are experiencing is not only forward, it is outward. You are being brought into alignment with a level of responsibility that cannot remain hidden without becoming disobedient. God is teaching you that elevation changes when He increases your reach, He also increases your accountability. That is why your conscience feels sharper, why compromises feel louder, why even small deviations disturb your peace. This is not condemnation, it is calibration. God does not elevate carelessly. He adjusts your inner compass before He expands your external influence. Some of you feel the weight of expectation increasing, and you think it means pressure from people. But God says it is pressure from purpose. Purpose presses from the inside, demanding expression, demanding obedience, demanding movement. You can ignore opinions, but you cannot ignore assignment. Purpose will keep knocking until you move. God is also dealing with your sense of identity. You are no longer allowed to define yourself by survival. You survived, yes, but survival was not the destination, it was training. Now, God is shifting you from endurance to authority, from reaction to direction, from maintenance to multiplication. You cannot keep calling yourself what you were when God has already renamed your function. This forced movement is also breaking cycles that ran quietly in your bloodline. Patterns of delay, patterns of fear, patterns of settling are losing their grip. God says, you are not only moving for yourself, you are moving as a disruption. What follows you will not struggle the way you did, because obedience creates pathways others can walk through more easily. You are learning that obedience sometimes requires speed. Delayed obedience can become disguised disobedience. God says when He says move, timing carries instruction. Hesitation invites interference. The longer you pause, the more voices try to interpret had God already made clear. That is why the movement feels urgent. Clarity has already been given. God is also training you to trust His character more than your comfort. Comfort is familiar, but it is not faithful. Comfort will keep you where you are known, not where you are needed. God says faithfulness often feels uncomfortable because it pulls you toward growth instead of rest. Rest will come later. Movement is required now. Some of you are facing internal resistance, your own thoughts questioning whether you deserve this shift. God says, stop negotiating with insecurity. You did not promote yourself. You did not assign yourself. If God initiated the movement, He will sustain it. Worthiness is not the requirement. Obedience is. God qualifies those He calls through alignment, not perfection. This season is also teaching you restraint. You do not need to announce every step. You do not need to defend every decision. God says wisdom knows when to speak and when to move silently. Noise attracts unnecessary attention. Focus attracts completion. Protect your momentum. You may notice that God is closing doors you thought you still needed. That is because you are carrying keys now. What once required access now requires authority. God says, stop standing outside doors He already empowered you to open. The movement is shifting you from waiting to leading. God is also refining your patience. Not everything will accelerate at the same pace. Some areas will move quickly, others will unfold slowly. Do not mistake delay in one area as denial of the whole. God moves in layers. Trust the process without rushing the outcome. This last January is also confronting your relationship. Do you? Why? Fear. Fear has been loud because it knows its influence is ending. Fear thrives on uncertainty, but obedience stars it. Each step you take weakens its voice. God says courage is not the absence of fear, it is obedience in its presence. You are learning how to walk by instruction instead of impulse. Emotional reactions are being replaced by spiritual discernment. God is slowing your response while accelerating your direction. This balance will keep you from costly mistakes. Maturity knows when to pause and when to press. God is also teaching you how to let go without resentment, release without bitterness, move without revenge. What you leave behind does not need to be punished, it simply needs to be released. God says bitterness ties you to what you are leaving. Forgiveness frees you to arrive fully where you are going. Some of you are worried about provision, but God says movement always carries supply. He does not send without sustaining. What you need will meet you in obedience, not before it. Provision follows alignment. Step first, and clarity will catch up. This movement is sharpening your spiritual hearing. You are becoming sensitive to instruction that once sounded faint. God says this sensitivity is necessary because where you are going requires precision. Guesswork will not be sufficient. Obedience must be exact. Do not envy those who seem comfortable where they are. Comfort can be a sign of inactivity. God says your restlessness is not rebellion, it is revelation. It is evidence that God is still speaking to you. Stagnation is quieter than obedience, but it produces less fruit. You are also learning that faith does not eliminate responsibility, it increases it. God trusts you with movement because you have proven faithful in stillness. You handled the waiting without quitting. Now handle the movement without arrogance. This last January is not asking for your opinion, it is demanding your response. God is not negotiating this shift. He is inviting you to trust Him through it. Once you move fully into obedience, resistance will lose its power, confusion will lose its grip, and fear will lose its authority. Let your steps be firm, even if your emotions fluctuate. Let your direction remain steady, even if the environment shifts. God is faithful to complete what He initiates. And as you continue to move, you will discover that what once felt force becomes freedom. What once felt heavy becomes strength. And what once felt uncertain becomes undeniable alignment. Now understand this as well. God is rearranging your relationship with time. You can no longer afford to waste energy on distractions that once felt harmless. Time has become sacred because assignment has become urgent. God says, this is the hour where discipline is not optional. It is protective. Every moment you steward wisely becomes fuel for the movement ahead. Every moment you misuse becomes friction. This is why you feel a growing intolerance for procrastination, gossip, and empty cycles. Your spirit knows the cost of delay now. God is also teaching you how to stand when outcomes are not immediate. Obedience does not always produce instant reward, but it always produces alignment. Alignment attracts favor at the right moment, not the rushed one. God says patience in motion is different from waiting in fear. You are moving even when results are still forming. That is mature faith. Some of you are learning that obedience can be lonely before it becomes influential. God often separates before He multiplies. He isolates before He expands. Not because He wants you alone, but because clarity is born in quiet. Crowds confuse instruction. Solitude sharpens it. God says, do not be afraid of the quiet. It is where direction becomes precise. This movement is also training your courage. Courage is not loud confidence. It is quiet resolve. It is waking up and choosing obedience again, even when yesterday felt heavy. God says courage grows through repetition. Every obedient step strengthens the next one. What once terrified you now only challenges you. Soon what challenges you will obey you. God is also pruning your expectations. You had ideas about how this season would look, who would support you, how smoothly things would transition. But God says expectation without surrender becomes limitation. When you release how it must happen, you receive permission for God to do it better than you imagine. You're also discovering that authority does not come from position. It comes from alignment. People sense when someone is moving under divine instruction. Words carry weight. Presence carries influence. God says alignment speaks before explanation ever does. That is why some will resist you without understanding why. Alignment confronts compromise without saying a word. This forced movement is also strengthening your spiritual backbone. You are learning how to say no without guilt and yes without fear. Boundaries are becoming clearer. Convictions are becoming firmer. God says softness of heart does not require weakness of will. You can be compassionate, and decisive at the same time. God is teaching you how to respond instead of react. Reaction is emotional. Response is instructed. The more you move with God, the less impulsive you become. You pause not out of fear, but out of wisdom. This restraint will protect you from traps disguised as opportunities. Some of you feel like you are being stretched beyond what feels reasonable. God says stretching is necessary when capacity is increasing. What does not stretch cannot expand. Resistance during stretching does not mean you are breaking. It means you are growing. Trust the process even when it is uncomfortable. God is also revealing the difference between momentum and haste. Momentum is God-driven, haste is fear-driven. Momentum feels steady even when it is fast. Haste feels chaotic even when it is slow. God says follow His pace, not your anxiety. You will arrive whole, not exhausted. This last January is also restoring your reverence. Not fear of circumstances, but awe of God's sovereignty. You are remembering that outcomes do not depend solely on your strength, your intelligence, or your connections. God is the source. When reverence returns, peace follows. When peace returns, clarity increases. You are learning that obedience often requires releasing control over how others perceive you. Misunderstanding is part of leadership. God says, if you try to manage perception, you will compromise direction. Let your integrity speak over time. Truth does not rush to be believed, it waits to be proven. God is also strengthening your inner witness. You know when to move now. You know when to stop now. You know when to speak and when to remain silent. This discern. Men did not come overnight. It was forged through waiting, disappointment, and persistence. God wastes nothing. Some of you are stepping into responsibility that feels heavier than expected. God says responsibility is a sign of trust. He would not place weight on you if you could not carry it. Do not shrink under responsibility. Stand taller. Authority grows when responsibility is honored. This movement is also detoxing your spirit. You are becoming sensitive to environments that drain you. God says, listen to that sensitivity. It is not arrogance, it is protection. Where you are going requires clarity, and clarity cannot thrive in constant chaos. You are learning how to move forward without needing closure from the past. God says closure comes from obedience, not explanations. You do not need everyone to understand your departure for it to be valid. Your peace is not dependent on their agreement. God is also restoring joy, not shallow excitement, but steady confidence. Joy that does not depend on circumstances. Joy that anchors you when uncertainty arises. This joy is strength. It will sustain you when motivation fluctuates. This season is sharpening your faith language. You are speaking less about fear and more about direction, less about obstacles and more about instruction. God says what you speak consistently shapes what you experience eventually. Guard your words. They are companions to your movement. You are also learning that obedience attracts opposition before it attracts celebration. Do not be discouraged by resistance. Resistance confirms that movement is real. Stillness does not provoke reaction, direction does. God says, keep moving. This last January is sealing something in you. Resolve, focus, maturity. You are no longer easily shaken. You are no longer easily swayed. God has anchored you internally so that external shifts do not destabilize you. And as you continue to move step by step, without rushing and without retreating, you will realize that this forced movement was not God pushing you away from safety. It was God guiding you into assignment. What once felt uncertain will become familiar. What once felt heavy will become manageable. What once felt unclear will become undeniable. Listen to me carefully, because what I am about to say is not comfortable. It is not familiar, and it may shake everything you thought you understood. God told me that speaking in tongues is not what you think, and if you lean in with humility instead of tradition, your life will never be the same again. Many people have been taught to chase sounds, to imitate syllables, to measure spirituality by what comes out of the mouth. But God does not measure depth by noise, and heaven is not impressed by performance. God is calling this generation out of imitation and into revelation, out of repetition and into alignment, out of confusion and into clarity. This message is not for the proud, it is for the hungry. Not for those who want to appear spiritual, but for those who want to become vessels that God can trust with power. For years, people have been told that if you do not sound a certain way, you are missing something. They have been pressured, pushed, and sometimes shamed into producing something external to prove something internal. But God said to me, I never asked my people to copy one another. I asked them to listen to me. Speaking in tongues was never meant to be a badge of superiority, never meant to divide the sincere from the insecure, never meant to be a spiritual competition. God does not move by crowd pressure. God moves by obedience. When people chase manifestations without transformation, they end up loud but empty, emotional but unchanged, expressive but still bound. God is not after noise, God is after surrender. Let me tell you something that God made very clear to me. True spiritual language begins long before the mouth opens. It begins when the heart bows. It begins when the ego is silenced. It begins when the soul stops demanding control and starts yielding direction. Many people want to speak mysteries, but they have not learned to listen in silence. I want to command realms, but they have not learned to submit their own desires. God said, why would I entrust you with words from heaven when you ignore the instructions I already gave you? This is why many feel frustrated, because they are trying to access power without alignment. Speaking in tongues, as God revealed it to me, is not about impressing others or even yourself. It is about calm. Union that bypasses ego. It is about communication that transcends vocabulary. It is the soul responding to God beyond learned language. But here is where people misunderstand it. They think it starts with the mouth, but it starts with the spirit. If the spirit is noisy, the mouth will be confused. If the spirit is pure, the expression will be authentic. God is not interested in borrowed sounds, G. OD is interested in genuine surrender. There are people who can speak fluently yet remain unchanged, and there are people who never utter a mystical sound yet walk in deep authority because their lives are aligned with God. Do not confuse expression with intimacy. Intimacy is built in obedience, in secrecy, in consistency, and in reverence. God told me that many are speaking without listening, and that is why they feel disconnected. You cannot speak heaven's language while ignoring heaven's will. The power is not in the sound, the power is in the alignment behind it. God said, my voice was never limited to syllables. When God speaks, creation responds. When God speaks, hearts awaken. When God speaks, direction is released. If speaking in tongues does not draw you closer to God, correct your character, sharpen your discernment, and increase your obedience, then you are mistaking noise for intimacy. True spiritual communication leaves you more humble, not more proud, more disciplined, not more chaotic, more loving, not more judgmental. Many people ask, why do I feel empty even though I speak? And God answered, because you learned the sound but not the surrender. Spiritual land. Language without spiritual discipline becomes a ritual. God never asked for rituals. God asked for hearts. When the heart is aligned, the expression flows naturally. When the heart is divided, the expression becomes forced. God does not force communication. God responds to hunger. Let me go deeper, because this is where God stretched me. God said that true speaking in tongues is often silent. It is the inward groaning of the soul that words cannot carry. It is the moment when tears speak louder than syllables. It is when obedience replaces explanation. It is when trust replaces understanding. Many of the most powerful moments with God happen when nothing is spoken, yet everything is surrendered. Heaven is not activated by volume, it is activated by truth. There are people who have been wound, dead by pressure, made to feel less spiritual because they did not sound like others. God is healing that wound right now. God says, I never rejected you for your silence. I rejected the pride that taught you to perform. God sees the heart that longs, even when the mouth is quiet. God hears the prayer that is lived, not just spoken. Your obedience is a language. Your faithfulness is a language. Why? Our humility is a language. Speaking in tongues was never meant to replace righteous living. It was never meant to excuse disobedience. God said, do not speak to me in mystery if you ignore me in clarity. If God has already told you to forgive, to let go, to be honest, to be disciplined, then no amount of spiritual language will override that instruction. God is not confused by sound. God sees alignment. Some people want the fire without the altar. They want the expression without the sacrifice. But God moves where surrender is complete. When speaking in tongues becomes a response to God's presence rather than a demand for God's power, it becomes pure. When it flows from intimacy instead of insecurity, it becomes authentic. God is not teaching us how to speak louder. God is teaching us how to yield deeper. I hear God saying that many people have been blocked, not because they lack language, but because they lack obedience. They want God to speak through them, but they do not want God to correct them. They want to sound spiritual, but they do not want to live disciplined. God said, I do not dwell in performance, I dwell in truth. When truth governs your life, expression follows naturally. Let me tell you something strong. The most dangerous spiritual state is thinking you are advanced because you sound advanced. God resists pride, even spiritual pride. If speaking in tongues makes you feel superior instead of surrender, something is wrong. If it distances you from people instead of increasing compassion, something is wrong. God's presence always produces humility. God told me that the next move is not about louder gatherings, but deeper hearts, not about more words, but more obedience, not about spiritual displays, but spiritual integrity. And those who understand this will walk in authority without shouting, will influence without forcing, will carry weight without noise. When God rests on a person, their life speaks before their mouth. Some of you, realizing right now that you have been chasing an experience instead of cultivating a relationship. God is not an experience to be consumed. God is a presence to be honored. When you honor God with your life, your communication with Him becomes natural. You stop striving to sound spiritual because you are busy becoming obedient. God is restoring balance. God is removing fear. God is breaking false expectations. Speaking in tongues is not a test you failed. It is a flow you enter through surrender. It is not about copying. It is about yielding. It is not about pressure. It is about presence. And presence cannot be forced. Hear me clearly. God never asked you to fake what you have not received. God never asked you to imitate what you do not understand. God asked you to seek Him with all your heart. When you seek God sincerely, expression finds you. When you chase expression without seeking God, confusion finds you. There is a purity that God is restoring, a simplicity, a depth. God is saying, come back to me, not to methods. When you return to God with a pure heart, communication becomes effortless. Your life becomes prayer. Your obedience becomes worship. Your silence becomes powerful. Some of the strongest people in the Spirit are quiet, not because they lack fire, but because they carry weight. Fire that is controlled can warm a nation. Fire that is uncontrolled destroys the house. God is teaching restraint, reverence, and maturity. Speaking in tongues without wisdom is like fire without direction. God is not stripping power, God is purifying it. God is not silencing. In His people, God is teaching them to listen. Because when you listen, you speak with authority. When you listen, your words carry life. When you listen, your obedience becomes louder than any sound. I feel God urging you to release comparison. Stop measuring your spirituality by how you sound. Measure it by how you live. Measure it by how quickly you obey. Measure it by how deeply you forgive. Measure it by how faithfully you walk when no one is watching. That is the language God responds to. Speaking in tongues is not what you think because you thought it was the goal. God says it was always the overflow. Overflow comes after filling. Filling comes after surrender. Surrender comes after humility. And humility comes when you realize God does not need your sound. God desires your heart. God is calling people out of confusion into clarity, out of emotional dependence into spiritual maturity. Many have mistaken intensity for intimacy, volume for virtue, expression for authority. But God says authority is carried, not shouted. Authority flows from alignment, not excitement. When God trusts a person, their words carry weight even when whispered, and their silence speaks louder than a crowd. This is why some speak endlessly, yet nothing shifts, while others speak once and atmospheres change. God is not moved by effort. God is moved by surrender. There is a realm of communication with God that is beyond language, beyond sound, beyond form. It is the realm where obedience becomes dialogue and trust becomes expression. God said, when you live rightly, you are already speaking. Me. Every time you choose integrity over convenience, you are speaking. Every time you choose patience over anger, you are speaking. Every time you choose faith over fear, you are speaking. Heaven understands the language of alignment more than the language of sound. Many people have been frustrated because they were told that power comes from speaking, when in truth power comes from yielding. Speaking without yielding creates noise. Yielding without speaking creates authority. God is not impressed by how spiritual you sound in public. God is moved by how faithful you are in private. The unseen moments shape the visible ones. The silent choices prepare the audible expressions. God builds His vessels in secret before releasing them in public. God told me that a generation is rising that will not be impressed by displays, but by depth. They will not chase emotional highs, but eternal truth. They will not measure spirituality by how long someone speaks, but by how accurately they live. This generation will not be confused by pressure, because they will be rooted in understanding. They will know that speaking in tongues was never a requirement to be loved by God, never a proof of worth, never a shortcut to authority. It's always meant to be an overflow of intimacy, not a substitute for it. Some of you feel relief right now, because deep down you always sense that God was not distant from you just because you were quiet. God is affirming you. God says, I have been listening to your heart all along. God hears the prayers you lived when you had no words. God honored the faith you showed when you kept walking even without understanding. God has always been closer than you were taught to believe. Now hear this with clarity. God is not removing spiritual expression. God is restoring its meaning. God is not rejecting tongues. God is rejecting imitation. God is not silencing His people. God is purifying their motives. When expression flows from purity, it carries. Wife, when it flows from pressure, it produces confusion. God is separating what is real from what is rehearsed. What is birthed from what is copied? There are people who learn patterns but never encountered presence. They learned how to sound right, but never learned how to surrender right. God says, return to me, not to techniques. When you return to God fully, expression will find you at each right time, in the right way, with the right purpose. You will not have to force it. You will not have to fear it. You will not have to compare it. It will flow naturally because it will come from intimacy, not insecurity. God is also correcting the idea that spiritual language gives permission to ignore wisdom. True spiritual depth sharpens discernment. It does not remove responsibility, it increases it. If your spirituality disconnects you from accountability, something is wrong. If it separates you from humility, something is wrong. God's presence always produces balance, clarity, and self-control. Disorder is not a sign of depth, discipline is. God said to me, many speak to escape responsibility, but I speak to establish it. When God communicates with a person, it strengthens the IR character. It does not weaken it. It grounds them. It matures them. It makes them dependable. This is why God is calling people away from shallow expression into rooted obedience. God wants carriers, not performers. God wants stewards, not imitators. Let this settle in your spirit. Heaven responds to alignment faster than articulation. When your life aligns with God's will, doors open without force. Provision follows without panic. Peace settles without explanation. This is the language of trust. This is the communication God responds to immediately. Speaking in tongues was never meant to replace this. It was meant to flow from this. Some of you are being invited into a deeper walk where you no longer need validation from people to feel close to God. You no longer need to prove spirituality through sound. You know God because you walk with God. Your confidence comes from consistency. Your assurance comes from obedience. God is raising people who are unshakable because their foundation is truth, not experience. God is also healing those who were hurt by misuse of authority, where spiritual language was used to control, intimidate, or elevate certain people above others. God says, I never used my voice to crush people. God's communication always liberates, never enslaves. It always brings people closer to truth, not into fear. If something produces fear, confusion, or shame, it did not come from God. There is a holy simplicity God is restoring. Walk with me, listen to me, obey me, trust me. Everything else flows from that. When communication becomes complicated, return to obedience. When expression feels forced, return to humility. When confusion arises, return to truth. God is not distant, God is precise. God is not hiding, God is inviting. I feel God calling people to lay down striving. Stop trying to reach God through performance. God is already near. Stop trying to sound spiritual and start living surrendered. When your life becomes a living response, oh God, your communication with Him becomes natural, deep, and powerful. Then whether you speak or remain silent, heaven recognizes your voice. This is the recalibration. This is the restoration. This is the invitation. God is not asking you to become louder. God is asking you to become truer. God is not asking you to imitate. God is asking you to yield. God is not asking you to perform. God is asking you to trust. And when you do, everything you thought you had to force will begin to flow. Because true spiritual language has always been the life that bows, the heart that listens, and the will that obeys God without needing applause, pressure, or permission. God is revealing that many people were taught to chase the gift instead of the giver, the manifestation instead of the master, the S, sound instead of the source. And when the focus shifts away from God, even sacred things lose their power. God never wanted people to become dependent on moments. God wanted them to become rooted in truth. Moments fade, emotions rise and fall, but truth establishes a person. This is why God is emphasizing understanding in this hour. Understanding protects you from deception. Understanding anchors white when feelings fluctuate. Understanding keeps you steady when expressions differ. There is a dangerous misconception that spirituality must always look dramatic. But God often works in quiet precision. God shapes destinies in stillness. God corrects hearts in silence. God strengthens faith in unseen places. Many of the deepest encounters with God happen when no one is watching and no sound is ade. This is where character is formed. This is where authority is built. God trusts those who can remain faithful without recognition, because those are the ones who will not misuse power when it comes. God said to me, do not confuse spiritual hunger with spiritual noise. Hunger draws you closer to God. Noise distracts you from God. Hunger leads to discipline. Noise leads to exhaustion. Hunger produces clarity. Noise produces confusion. God is training His people to recognize the difference. Those who mature spiritually learn to value substance over sensation. They learn to wait, to listen, to discern. They learn that God does not rush, and therefore they do not need to rush either. Some people feel lost because they thought speaking in tongues was the proof that God was with them. The sound stopped or never came. They assumed God had left. But God says, I never left you. I was with you in your obedience, in your struggle, in your quiet faith. God's presence is not proven by volume, it is proven by fruit. When God is with a person, their life changes, their choices change, their priorities change, their reactions change. This is the evidence God looks for. God is also exposing how imitation has replaced revelation. People copy what they see because they fear being different. But God never anointed copies. God anoints originals. God speaks uniquely to each heart. When you try to replicate someone else's expression, you silence your own calling. God says, I want to speak through you, not through who you admire. Authenticity honors God. Imitation limits growth. There is a weight to God's presence that cannot be faked. It rests on those who walk consistently, not occasionally. It rests on those who fear God more than people. It rests on those who obey even when obedience is inconvenient. This weight is what shifts atmospheres, opens doors, and brings favor. It does not come from sound, it comes from submission. God is reminding us that spiritual language without wisdom can lead to pride. Pride always distances people from God, even when wrapped in spiritual clothing. True encounters with God make a person smaller in their own eyes and greater in their compassion for others. If spirituality makes you harsh, dismissive, or superior, it has lost its alignment. God's presence always produces humility, patience, and clarity. Some of you are realizing that you have been hard on yourself because you did not fit into a mold. God is breaking that mold right now. God says, I formed you with intention. Your quiet nature is not a weakness. Your reflective spirit is not a lack. God uses still waters as much as rushing winds. Different expressions, same God. Different vessels, same power. God is Al. So teaching that true spiritual communication is tested by time. What is real remains, what is forced fades. If something needs constant hype to survive, it is not rooted. But what God plants grows steadily, quietly, and deeply. God is patient. God is intentional. God is thorough. And God works the same way in people. There is a refining happening where God is stripping away dependence on external validation. God is teaching people to hear Him without needing approval. When you know God has spoken to you, you do not need to prove it. You walk it out, you live it, you let time confirm it. This is maturity, this is strength. God said, many want to speak for me, but few want to walk with me. Walking with God requires consistency. It requires surrender. It requires trust when answers are deep. Elate. It requires obedience when outcomes are uncertain. But those who walk with God develop discernment. They know when to speak and when to remain silent. They know when expression is needed and when restraint is wisdom. Speaking in tongues was never meant to override discernment. It was never meant to bypass wisdom. God values understanding. God values order. God values clarity. Anything T leads away from these does not reflect God's nature. God is not chaotic. God is precise. God is intentional. God's communication always aligns with truth and wisdom. Some people think that if they do not express themselves spiritually the same way others do, they are missing God. But God is saying, you are missing me only when you stop listening. Listening is the foundation of all communication. A person who listens well will speak well. A person who listens to God will live wisely. God is drawing people into a deeper confidence where they no longer question on their closeness to God based on comparison. They know God because they walk with God. They recognize God's guidance in daily decisions, not just spiritual moments. This is real intimacy. This is sustainable faith. I sense God emphasizing responsibility. With depth comes accountability. With understanding comes stewardship. God entrusts more to those who are faithful with what they already know. God does not rush growth. God ensures stability. When a person is stable, expression becomes safe. This is not a rejection of spiritual expression. It is a call to maturity. God is not minimizing the spiritual. God is deepening it. God is not taking away power. God is teaching how to carry it. Power without character destroys, but power with humility transforms. God is inviting you to rest in truth. You do not have to force anything. You do not have to perform. You do not have to prove. Walk with God, obey God, trust God. Let your life speak first. And when expression comes, it will come with clarity, authority, and peace, flowing from a heart that is aligned, a mind that is renewed, and a spirit that has learned that the deepest communication with God has always been a life fully surrendered to Him. God is awakening discernment, because discernment is the guardrail of true spirituality. Without discernment, people become vulnerable to confusion, manipulation, and misplaced devotion. God says discernment is not suspicion, it is clarity. It is the ability to recognize what draws you closer to God and what quietly pulls you away. When discernment is active, you stop chasing that thing that shines and start valuing what endures. You stop asking, how does it look? And start asking, does this align with God's nature? God is also correcting the belief that spiritual growth is instant. Many expect immediate depth without enduring process, but God forms strength through seasons. Roots grow in darkness before fruit appears in light. If God slowed you down, it was not punishment. Meant it was preparation. If God kept you quiet, it was not rejection. it was refinement. God knows when exposure would damage what is still developing. Silence is often protection. There is a sacred patience God is restoring. Patience teaches you to trust God's timing instead of demanding God's speed. When patience matures, anxiety loses its grip. When patience is present, comparison fades. God says those who wait learn how to carry what they receive. Those who rush often drop what they ask for. Spiritual language without patience becomes restless, but patience aligns the soul with God's rhythm. God is revealing that true communication with Him reshapes how you see people. When you walk closely with God, judgment softens and compassion deepens. You stop measuring others by their expression and start honoring their journey. God never asked you to evaluate hearts. God asked you to guard your own. Depth with God always produces mercy, never arrogance. Some have been wounded because spiritual expression was used to silence questions instead of inviting understanding. But God is not afraid of sincere questions. God welcomes honest seeking. Faith that cannot ask is faith that has been intimidated. God says truth does not fear examination. What comes from God stands firm under scrutiny. God invites you to understand, not to blindly imitate. God is also teaching that obedience is the highest form of trust. Obedience says, I trust God even when I do not understand. Obedience says, God knows better than my emotions. Obedience is communication that heaven recognizes instant. Why? When you obey, you are speaking God's language fluently. Disobedience, no matter how spiritual it sounds, creates distance. There are people who speak beautifully but live inconsistently. God is calling for congruence. What you say and how you live must agree. God does not anoint contradiction. Integrity carries authority. When your private life matches your public expression, your words car. I wait. This is why God emphasizes character over charisma. God is dismantling the illusion that spirituality exempts you from responsibility. Spiritual maturity makes you more accountable, not less. It teaches you to manage emotions, control impulses, and respond wisely. God's presence sharpens discipline. If something weakens your discipline, it is not drawing you closer to God. God is also restoring reverence. Reverence is not fear that paralyzes. It is honor that steadies. Reverence keeps you grounded. It reminds you that God is holy, wise, and intentional. When reverence is lost, spirituality becomes casual and shallow. When reverence is restored, depth returns naturally. There is a call to inward strength. God is raising people who do not collapse when attention fades. Their faith is not fueled by applause, but by conviction. They remain steady in quiet seasons because they know God is present even when nothing is visible. This kind of faith does not panic when expression changes. It trusts God's nearness beyond sensation. God says many people want spiritual shortcuts, but there are none. Depth costs time, humility, and consistency. God does not pour His weight on unstepped foundations. When He delays, He is strengthening you. When He withholds, He is protecting you. God's timing is an expression of His care. God is also inviting you to examine what you depend on for reassurance. If your peace depends on constant signs, it is fragile. But when your peace rests in trust, it is unshakable. God wants you anchored in truth, not addicted to affirmation. When truth whores you, expression becomes free instead of forced. There is a cleansing happening where God is separating devotion from display. Devotion is quiet, faithful, and enduring. Display is loud, temporary, and often insecure. God sees devotion long before display. God rewards devotion long after display fades. This is why those who endure with God outlast those who impress people. God is speaking to the weary who feel unseen. Your consistency has not been ignored. Your quiet obedience has not been wasted. God builds legacies through faithfulness, not through noise. What you have done in secret has shaped you more than you realize. God is precise in His accounting. God is also correcting expectations. Spiritual growth does not remove struggle, it gives strength within it. It does not eliminate questions, it teaches patience with them. God never promised ease, God promised presence. When presence is understood, expression becomes secondary. There is a deeper confidence God is offering, where you no longer question whether God hears you. You know He does, because your life reflects His guidance. You see His direction in your choices, His correction in your restraint, His wisdom in your timing. This is communion beyond sound. God is reminding us that language was given to serve truth, not replace it. Truth stands even when words fail. When you live truth, you speak powerfully even in silence. This is the kind of spirituality that endures storms, resists pride, and produces peace. God is not asking you to abandon expression. God is asking you to anchor it. Anchor it in humility. Anchor it in obedience. Anchor it in understanding. When expression is anchored, it does not confuse or divide. It builds, heals, and aligns. There is an invitation to depth that cannot be rushed, performed, or imitated. It can only be received through surrender. God is calling you deeper, not into noise, but into truth, not into pressure, but into peace, not into performance, but into a life that reflects His will so clearly that every step, every pause, every choice becomes a living conversation with God. God is drawing a line between what is real and what is rehearsed, between what is born from intimacy and what is produced by pressure. This is not a message meant to condemn, but to liberate. God is freeing people from striving, from comparison, from the fear of not measuring up spiritually. God never asked you to become someone else to be close to Him. God asked you to walk honestly, humbly, and faithfully before Him. When you do, you are already speaking a language heaven understands. Let this settle deep within you. Your value before God was never determined by how you sound, but by how you surrender. Your closeness to God was never measured by volume, but by obedience. Your depth was never proven by expression, but by consistency. God has always been listening to your heart, watching your choices, shaping your character. Nothing sincere has been wasted. Nothing faithful has been ignored. God is calling you into rest, not complacency, but confident rest. Rest that calm, from knowing you do not have to perform to be accepted. Rest that comes from trusting that God is near even in silence. Rest that allows expression to flow naturally, without fear, without pressure, without imitation. When God leads, there is peace. When God speaks, there is clarity. When God fills, there is overflow. Now walk forward with understanding. Let your life speak first. Let obedience lead expression. Let humility guard depth. Let reverence anchor every spiritual experience. God is not far. God is not silent. God is not confused. God is inviting you into a deeper, truer, purer walk, where every breath becomes devotion And every step becomes communication, where sound is no longer chased, but alignment is cherished, and where your life itself becomes a living testimony of what it truly means to walk with God. At this very moment, while your eyes are fixed and your heart is listening, something invisible but powerful is happening. God is orchestrating an encounter. And if you dare to believe, if you dare to stay, if you dare to let this word touch your spirit, your life will never return to what it used to be. What you are about to touch is not material, it is not physical, but it carries weight, authority, and destiny. Whoever touches this with faith, alignment, and obedience will step into abundance that shocks their own understanding. I want you to understand something deeply before your mind tries to resist it. God does not create lack, and God does not design mediocrity. Poverty is not a virtue, and struggle is not a permanent assignment. God is a God of fullness, overflow, and divine supply. From the beginning of time, everything God touched multiplied. When God speaks, barren ground produces. When God commands, empty nets overflow. When God breathes, dry places come alive. The same God who created abundance without effort is watching you right now, waiting for your spirit to agree with what He has already decided. Some of you have been working hard, praying hard, believing hard, yet you feel stuck in cycles that refuse to break. You've asked yourself why others rise while you remain planted, why doors open for them while yours seem sealed. Hear this clearly. It is not because God loves them more. It is because alignment always precedes acceleration. God does not release increase into confusion. He does not pour wealth into hands that doubt His nature. Before God multiplies money, He multiplies mindset. Before God increases income, He enlarges vision. Before God releases millions, He tests your ability to touch instruction without questioning it. When I say whoever touches this, I am not talking about superstition or magic. I am talking about spiritual contact with truth. I am talking about touching obedience, touching discipline, touching faith without negotiation. Every breakthrough in history began when someone touched a word from God and refused to let go. They were not the most qualified, they were not the most connected, but they were the most convinced. Conviction is the currency God responds to. Hesitation delays destiny, but bold faith activates heaven. God is not looking for people who merely listen. He is looking for people who respond. Many hear the voice of God, but few touch it with action. That is why many remain inspired but unchanged. Inspiration excites you, but obedience transforms you. The moment you touch this word with obedience, invisible systems begin to rearrange. People you have never met will feel compelled to help you. Opportunities you did not apply for will locate you. Ideas you never studied for will download into your mind. This is how God moves. Quietly, precisely, powerfully. You must break agreement with small thinking. Small thinking insults a big God. If God created the universe, if God sustains the earth without effort, if God feeds every creature without stress, then why would your provision be a struggle? The problem has never been God's ability. The problem has been human permission. God will not force abundance on a mind that is comfortable with survival. The moment you touch this truth and say, I refuse to live beneath what God designed, something shifts in the spiritual atmosphere around you. There is a reason resistance rises when destiny is near. There is a reason fear speaks loudest when breakthrough is closest. The enemy does not fight what is irrelevant. The pressure you feel is proof of proximity. You are closer than you think, but closeness requires courage. God does not reward intention, He rewards movement. Faith that does not move is faith that does not multiply. When you touch this word, you are declaring war on limitation, and limitation never leaves quietly. Some of you have been faithful in secret. You have honored God when nobody noticed. You have given when it cost you. You have stood when it was easier to sit. God has been watching, and God never forgets obedience. There is a divine accounting system that never fails. What you sowed in tears will be reaped in astonishment. What you released in faith will return in abundance. God does not pay minimum wage, He rewards overflow. When God decides to bless, He does it in a way that silences every doubt that ever mocked you. Let me speak directly to your future. Wealth is not evil when it is directed by God. Money is a tool, and God places tools in the hands of those He trusts. God is not afraid of you having resources. He is concerned about resources having you. When your heart is anchored in God, wealth becomes a servant, not a master. God raises people with wealth to fund purpose, to restore dignity, to build solutions, and to shift generations. When God makes someone a millionaire, it is never just about them. It is about impact. Touching this means touching responsibility. Millionaire thinking is not reckless, it is disciplined. It is not lazy, it is strategic. God does not bless chaos, He blesses order. If you want millions, you must respect principles. You must honor time, sharpen skill, cultivate wisdom, and steward what you already have. God will not give you more if you despise what is small. Small is not insignificant, small is a test. How you handle little reveals how you will handle much. Some of you are waiting for a miracle while ignoring instruction. God often answers prayers through wisdom, not wonders. The idea you keep postponing is the answer. The skill you keep undervaluing is the key. The discipline you keep avoiding is the door. When you touch this truth, excuses lose power. You stop blaming systems, people, and circumstances. You realize that God has already placed something in your hands that can multiply if you nurture it. There is a supernatural law of focus. What you honor grows. If you honor lack, you will multiply lack. If you honor fear, fear will expand. But when you honor God's promise, abundance responds. Your words matter more than you realize. Death and life are shaped by what you repeatedly declare. Speak what aligns with God, not what aligns with your past. Your past does not define your capacity, God does. I sense that many of you have been conditioned to expect just enough to survive, just enough to manage, just enough to get by. But God is calling you out of survival and into stewardship. Survivors think about today, stewards think about generations. God does not bless for comfort alone. He blesses for continuity. When God increases you, it is because He sees beyond you. He sees families changed, communities rebuilt, futures rewritten. Touching this means letting go of guilt around success. You don't need to apologize for rising. You don't need permission to prosper. When God lifts you, it is not arrogance to stand tall, it is obedience. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is agreeing with what God says about you. If God says you are capable, qualified, and chosen, then denying that is not humility, it is disbelief. Some of you have been surrounded by voices that shrink your faith. They mean well, but they speak from limitation. You must guard what you allow to shape your belief. Faith is fragile before it is fortified. Protect it, feed it, strengthen it with truth. When you touch this word deeply, you will feel a separation, a shift where old conversations no longer satisfy you. Growth demands distance. Elevation requires isolation before celebration. God does sudden things, but sudden things are built on seasons of preparation. What looks like overnight success is usually years of unseen discipline. Don't rush the process, honor it. Every delay has been developing you. Every closed door has been redirecting you. God wastes nothing. Even your failures have been training grounds. When God releases wealth into your life, it will not break you because He has been building you. I want you to understand the power of expectation. Expectation is faith in motion. When you expect little, you receive little. When you expect God to move, You position yourself for miracles. Expectation does not mean entitlement. It means anticipation rooted in trust. God responds to those who believe He is able. Doubt is expensive. It costs you opportunities you never recognize. Touching this truth activates gratitude. Gratitude molt applies what complaining repels. Thank God not just for what you have, but for what is coming. Praise is not denial of reality, it is declaration of authority. When you praise God in advance, you are declaring that lack does not have the final word. God does. Some of you will become millionaires, not because you chased money, but because you chased alignment. Wealth will follow obedience. Provision will follow purpose. Increase will follow integrity. God is raising people who will not compromise values for profit. When God trusts you, He accelerates you. Trust is the gateway to overflow. This is not about touching a screen, a voice, or a moment. This is about touching a decision. A decision to rise early, a decision to think bigger, a decision to obey faster, a decision to stop negotiating with fear. When you touch this decision, heaven responds, angels move, doors unlock, timelines shift. I speak to the weariness in your spirit. You are not tired because you are weak. You are tired because you have been carrying more than you were designed to carry. God is about to lift the weight. When increase comes, it will come with peace. God's blessing does not add sorrow. If it drains you, it is not from God. What God gives energizes you, sharpens you, and strengthens you. The wealth God releases will come with clarity. You will know where to invest, when to move, and when to wait. Confusion will lift, doubt will silence. Confidence will rise, not arrogance, but assurance. Assurance that God is with you, guiding you, and backing you. Do not underestimate this moment. Moments shape destinies. One word can alter direction. One decision can rewrite a future. When you touch this with faith, you are saying yes to discipline, yes to growth, yes to responsibility, yes to abundance with purpose. God is not limited by your background, your education, your past mistakes, or your current balance. God specializes in reversals. What was meant to limit you will become evidence of God's power. When you rise, people will ask how, and the answer will be simple. God, stay here in this truth. Let it sink deeper than emotion. Let it anchor in conviction. Because when conviction forms, action follows. And when action aligns with God, increase becomes inevitable. And those who truly touch this, not casually, not emotionally, but decisively, will step into a dimension of provision, influence, and responsibility that transforms not only their lives, but the lives connected to them. Because God never blesses in isolation. And what He is about to do through those who dare to believe will exceed what the mind can calculate, what fear can predict, and what history suggests. As abundance begins to respond to obedience, vision expands beyond limitation. And the future unfolds under the authority of God's promise, without delay, without apology, without retreat, as the seed becomes a harvest and the harvest becomes a legacy still unfolding. There is a deeper dimension God is inviting you into, and it begins with understanding authority. Wealth responds to authority, not desperation. God never answers panic, He answers alignment. When you know who you are before God, money loses its power to intimidate you. You stop chasing it and it begins to respond to you. Authority is established when your inner world agrees with God's word more than it agrees with circumstances. When your spirit stands firm, external systems adjust. This is not theory, this is spiritual law. God governs outcomes through alignment, and alignment produces results that effort alone cannot. Many people want increase, but they have not mastered stewardship of thought. Your mind is a field, and whatever you plant consistently will grow. If you sow fear, you will harvest hesitation. If you sow faith, you will harvest courage. God speaks first to the inner life, because outward change is born inwardly. Before God expands your territory, He expands your capacity to think, plan, and execute with clarity. When you touch this truth, you begin to discipline your thoughts. You stop entertaining doubt as if it were wisdom. You stop rehearsing failure as if it were humility. You learn to submit every thought to what God has spoken over your future. God is not impressed by how much you want something. He responds to how much you're willing to change for it. Transformation is the price of elevation. Every new level requires a new version of you. The habits that sustained you at one stage may sabotage you at the next. God will stretch you beyond comfort, because comfort breeds stagnation. Growth requires tension, and tension produces strength. When you touch this reality, you stop resisting discomfort and start recognizing it as preparation. There is a reason God often separates people before He elevates them. Not everyone can handle the process God uses to build you. Some relationships are seasonal, and when the season ends, clinging becomes disobedience. God removes distractions to sharpen focus. Focus is a force. Where focus goes, energy flows, and where energy flows, results appear. And God wants to make you productive. He teaches you how to say no without guilt and yes without delay. You must understand timing. Wealth released too early can destroy character. God is precise, not slow. What you call delay is often refinement. God is aligning resources, people, and moments with exact accuracy. When the release comes, it will not be chaotic. It will be ordered. You will not scramble. You will step into it with confidence. God does not surprise you with blessing without first preparing you for its weight. Let me speak to those who feel unseen. God does His greatest work in hidden places. Roots grow in darkness before trees rise in sunlight. If you are being developed quietly, do not despise it. God is building depth before visibility. Shallow success collapses under pressure, but deep preparation sustains expansion. When God lifts you, it will not be fragile. It will be stable, strong, and lasting. There is also the matter of obedience when it is inconvenient. Many obey God when it is comfortable, but true authority is forged when obedience costs you something. Obedience refines the heart. It teaches trust beyond logic. When God sees that you obey without needing full explanation, He entrusts you with greater responsibility. Wealth follows trust. God invests where loyalty is proven. Do not confuse generosity with loss. Nothing given in obedience is ever lost. God multiplies what is released with the right heart. When you give wisely and freely, you align with a principle older than time. Closed hands cannot receive. God is not trying to take from you. He is teaching you how to keep your heart free while your hands remain open. Freedom is essential for abundance. What controls you cannot be trusted to increase you. Some of you need to break covenant with fear of visibility. You have been hiding your potential because you fear judgment, criticism, or failure. But God does not bless hiding. He blesses faithfulness. You were not created to be invisible. You were created to influence. Influence requires visibility, and visibility requires courage. When God opens a platform, it is not to elevate ego, but to amplify impact. Step forward when God calls you forward. God is also refining your language. How you speak reveals what you believe. Speak with expectation, not apology. Speak with clarity, not confusion. Your words shape environments. God created through speech, and He has placed that creative capacity within you. Speak life over your work, your ideas, your future. Silence doubt by refusing to agree with it. You are entering a season where wisdom matters more than speed. Quick money without wisdom disappears quickly. Sustainable wealth is built on understanding. God will teach you when to move and when to wait. Waiting is not inactivity, it is strategic restraint. Those who rush ahead of God exhaust themselves. Those who move with God advance with strength. Let your identity remain anchored in God, not in outcomes. If success defines you, failure will break you. But when God defines you, success becomes a tool, not a trap. You remain grounded as you rise. God keeps you steady while increasing your reach. This stability is what allows wealth to flow without destroying purpose. There will be moments when you must choose integrity over opportunity. Choose integrity every time. Integrity attracts long-term favor. Short cuts lead to short-lived gains. God honors those who honor truth even when it costs them. When you protect your integrity, God protects your future. Understand this clearly. Abundance is not a destination, it is a responsibility. God increases you so you can increase others. Impact gives wealth meaning. Purpose gives money direction. When your vision includes others, God expands your reach. Self-centered success is small in the eyes of God, but purpose-driven increase draws divine backing. You are not too late, time bends under obedience. God restores years through alignment. What you thought was lost can be redeemed. When God accelerates, progress happens quickly and decisively. Do not measure your future by your past. Measure it by God's promise. Remain teachable. Pride blocks flow. Humility keeps channels open. God teaches those who remain curious, attentive, and willing to adjust. Growth requires correction. Correction is not rejection, it is guidance. When God corrects you, it is proof of investment. As you continue touching this truth, you will notice a shift in how you perceive obstacles. What once intimidated you will begin to instruct you. Challenges become classrooms. Resistance becomes confirmation. You stop asking why and start asking how. How can I grow? How can I refine? How can I align more deeply with God? Your future will require bold decisions. Comfort will try to negotiate with calling. Do not negotiate. Obedience is not partial. Trust God fully or not at all. Partial trust produces partial results. When you trust God completely, you move with confidence even when the path is unfamiliar. God is positioning you for influence that outlives you. Will become a channel, not a goal. You will build, restore, and empower. This is not about excess for display. It is about provision with purpose. God is shaping you into a steward of impact. Stay rooted, stay focused, stay obedient. Let patience refine you and wisdom guide you. Every step taken in alignment compounds over time. Momentum builds quietly until it becomes undeniable. When the increase manifests, it will be clear that it was not by chance, not by manipulation, not by force, but by alignment with God's order, God's timing, and God's authority. Unfolding steadily as your capacity expands. Your vision sharpens, your discipline deepens, and your life becomes evidence of what happens when faith is practiced. Obedience is honored and purpose is pursued under the guidance of God alone. As the unseen becomes visible and the prepared step fully into what has already been established in the unseen realm. Moving forward without hesitation, strengthened by conviction, grounded in truth, and carried by the unwavering consistency of God's promise unfolding continuously. There is another layer God is unfolding now, and it concerns discernment. Not every opportunity is a blessing, and not every open door is sent by God. Wealth without discernment becomes distraction. God trains those He will increase to recognize what to accept and what to refuse. Discernment is protection. It guards your time, your energy, and your focus. When God sharpens your discernment, you stop chasing what looks profitable but drains purpose. You learn to wait for what aligns, even if it arrives quietly. Quiet doors often lead to lasting increase. God is also teaching you the difference between Motion and momentum. Motion keeps you busy. Momentum moves you forward. Many exhaust themselves doing too much of what does not compound. God directs you toward actions that multiply over time. He teaches you systems, not just effort. Wisdom builds streams. Effort builds moments. When you touch this understanding, you stop measuring success by how tired you are and start measuring it by how effective your actions have become. Let your faith mature beyond emotional highs. God is not sustained by excitement. He is honored by consistency. Consistency builds credibility in the unseen. When you show up faithfully, even when there is no applause, God takes note. The unseen always precedes the visible. Discipline, practiced privately, produces authority expressed publicly. This is how God establishes people who last. There will be seasons when God asks you to simplify. Simplification is not loss, it is refinement. Too many options dilute focus. God reduces to increase clarity. When distractions fall away, purpose becomes sharper. Sharp purpose cuts through resistance. When you move with precision, results follow with less friction. God values clarity because clarity accelerates execution. Some of you are learning to trust God with control. Control feels safe, but it limits flow. Trust creates space for God to work beyond your calculations. When you release control, you gain guidance. God does not need you to manage outcomes. He asks you to manage obedience. Outcomes belong to Him. When you touch this truth, anxiety loosens its grip and peace becomes your posture even while you build. God also develops resilience. Wealth attracts pressure. Influence invites scrutiny. God's strength. Thins your inner life so external pressure does not fracture you. Resilience is built through perseverance. When challenges rise and you remain steady, you are being trained for scale. God prepares you to carry weight without breaking alignment. Pay attention to what God keeps highlighting to you repeatedly. Repetition is instruction. God emphasizes what is essential for your next level. Obey the promptings that return. Act on the insights that persist. Delayed obedience weakens momentum. Swift obedience preserves flow. When you move promptly, doors remain open longer. There is a shift happening in how you relate to time. You stop procrastinating and start prioritizing. You honor time as a gift entrusted by God. Time respected produces progress. Time wasted produces regret. When you align your schedule with purpose, productivity increases without burnout. God teaches balance so expansion does not consume you. Guard your heart as you rise. Success reveals character more than struggle. Remain grounded in gratitude. Gratitude keeps the heart soft while the hands grow strong. A grateful heart attracts favor because it recognizes God as the source. When God remains the source, abundance remains healthy. You will encounter moments where faith requires silence. Not every plan needs to be announced. Some seeds grow best underground. God will teach you when to speak and when to store. Strategic silence preserves momentum. When results appear, they will speak clearly. As you continue, your confidence will shift from self-belief to God trust. Self-belief fluctuates. God trust anchors. When you rely on God, you move with assurance even when conditions are unstable. Stability in. Uncertainty is a sign of mature faith. Expect refinement in your values. What you tolerate now will determine what you attract later. Set standards early. Standards create boundaries, and boundaries protect purpose. God honors those who honor what is right, even when it is costly. Long-term increase flows toward those who choose truth over convenience. Your vision will expand beyond personal gain. You will begin to see solutions where others see problems. Problem solvers are positioned for increase because value attracts provision. God elevates those who build solutions that serve many. Service multiplies impact. Impact attracts resources. When obstacles arise, do not personalize resistance. Resistance is feedback, not failure. Learn from it. Adjust without retreating. God teaches adaptability so you remain effective across seasons. Flexibility keeps you moving while rigidity stalls progress. Remain anchored in hope. Hope is not wishful thinking. It is confident expectation rooted in God's character. Hope fuels perseverance. When hope is alive, endurance follows. God strengthens those who refuse to surrender their expectation. Your journey will include moments of solitude. Solitude is not loneliness, it is recalibration. God uses stillness to refine direction. In quiet moments, clarity emerges. Listen carefully during these times. Guidance often arrives softly. There is a refining fire God allows that separates wishers from builders. This fire does not consume you, it clarifies you. It burns away impatience, entitlement, and imitation, leaving behind conviction, originality, and courage. God never called you to copy another path. Comparison blurs calling. When you try to mirror someone else's journey, you mute your own authority. God releases increase when you stand fully in the assignment designed for you. Original obedience unlocks uncommon results. Understand this, provision follows responsibility. God entrusts resources to those who demonstrate capacity to manage outcomes beyond themselves. Capacity is not measured by talent alone. It is measured by character under pressure. How you respond when things go wrong reveals whether you are ready for things to go right. God observes your reactions closely. Calm endurance signals maturity. Panic signals unreadiness. When your inner life remains anchored during storms, God knows you can carry expansion without losing direction. God is also teaching you the power of patience with action. Patience is not passivity, it is disciplined persistence. You keep building while waiting. You keep learning while trusting. You keep refining while believing. This kind of patience produces momentum that compounds quietly. While others quit because results are delayed, you continue because purpose is clear. God honors those who remain faithful to process, not just excited by promise. There is a moment when God invites you to elevate your standards of excellence. Excellence is worship in action. When you do your work with precision, honesty, and care, you reflect the nature of God. Excellence attracts attention without noise. It opens doors without force. When you touch this principle, you stop delivering what is easy and start delivering what is worthy. God increases those who respect quality because quality sustains growth. Your environment matters more than you think. God often prompts change ensue. Roundings to support change in direction. Where you place yourself influences what you believe is possible. Choose environments that stretch your thinking, sharpen your discipline, and challenge your comfort. Growth-friendly environments accelerate transformation. When you align your space with your calling, progress becomes natural. God will also challenge your relationship with risk. Faith involves calculated courage, not recklessness. You move forward informed by wisdom, not paralyzed by fear. God does not ask you to leap blindly. He asks you to step confidently. Each step reveals the next. When you move in alignment, clarity increases with motion. Stillness in fear breeds confusion. Movement in faith reveals direction. Let your identity remain rooted in obedience, not applause. Applause is fleeting. Obedience is eternal. When you seek approval, you compromise conviction. When you seek alignment, you gain authority. God does not measure success by visibility. He measures it by faithfulness. Stay faithful to what God assigned, even if recognition is delayed. Delayed recognition does not equal denied reward. As you rise, God will refine your leadership. Leadership begins with self-governance. If you can lead your thoughts, emotions, and time, you can lead outcomes. God increases those who master themselves. Self-mastery creates trust, and trust attracts opportunity. When others see consistency in you, they feel safe aligning with you. Safety multiplies influence. Expect moments when God asks you to invest before you see return. Seed time precedes harvest. Sowing stretches faith because it requires belief in what is not yet visible. When you sow wisely, patiently, and faithfully, you align with the timeless principle of increase. God ensures that nothing planted in obedience returns empty. Harvests may not arrive immediately, but they arrive decisively. There will be times when silence from God tests your perseverance. Silence is not absence, it is training. God teaches you to rely on what He has already spoken. When you continue moving based on conviction rather than constant confirmation, your faith matures. Mature faith does not need reassurance at every step. It trusts the path already revealed. Allow your gratitude to deepen beyond circumstances. Gratitude anchored in God remains steady regardless of outcomes. It keeps you grounded during growth and humble during success. A grateful heart stays open to guidance. God resists pride but flows freely through humility. Humility does not shrink you, it stabilizes you. Your work will begin to speak louder than your words. Consistent results build credibility. Credibility opens doors that charisma cannot. God values substance over performance. When substance is present, performance becomes unnecessary. Let integrity define your reputation. Reputation built on truth withstands pressure. As responsibility expands, rest becomes strategic. Rest is not laziness, it is wisdom. God designed rest to restore clarity and strength. Burnout distorts judgment. Sustained impact requires sustainable rhythms. When you honor rest, you protect longevity. God increases those who respect balance because balance preserves purpose. Your perspective on obstacles will continue to evolve. You will begin to see them as alignment checks rather than setbacks. Each challenge reveals what needs strengthening. When you address weaknesses promptly, growth accelerates. God exposes areas for refinement, not to shame you, but to prepare you. Stay committed to learning. Learning keeps you adaptable. Adaptability keeps you relevant. God guides those who remain teachable. Pride closes doors that humility opens. When you remain open to instruction, wisdom accumulates. Accumulated wisdom produces decisive leadership. The path ahead will demand courage to remain ethical when shortcuts tempt you. Choose honor every time. Honor compounds trust. Trust compounds opportunity. God protects those who protect integrity. Short-term gains achieved through compromise always cost more later. Long-term increase built on truth sustains legacy. Your influence will extend beyond your immediate reach. Decisions you make today will shape outcomes you may never personally witness. This is the nature of purpose. God thinks in generations, not moments. When you align with this perspective, your motivation deepens and your discipline strengthens. Continue forward with confidence rooted in God. Let patience steady you, wisdom guide you, and obedience anchor you. The unfolding before you is progressive and intentional, expanding as your capacity grows, clarifying as your discernment sharpens, and strengthening as your commitment remains firm. Advancing steadily under the authority and guidance of God alone, continuing to build, refine, and expand without pause, without retreat, without compromise, as purpose remains clear, provision aligned. Naturally, and the journey moves forward in ordered progression, sustained by trust, shaped by discipline, and carried onward in alignment with God's unchanging truth.